I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report.
Although there are plenty of therapeutic alternatives for asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, there are no biologics for treating acute exacerbations of these conditions. Connect Biopharma believes that's an opportunity. Its experimental therapy, rademikibart, has shown promise in treating exacerbations and providing sustained improvements. We spoke to Barry Quart, CEO of Connect Biopharma, about the unmet need the company is seeking to address, how rademikibart works, and Connect's repositioning as a U.S. centric company. Barry, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
We're going to talk about respiratory disease, Connect Biopharma, and its experimental therapy to treat acute exacerbations of asthma and COPD. Let's start with those respiratory conditions, though. These are conditions where there's a large number of existing therapies. How well are these diseases addressed today, and how much of an unmet need do they represent?
Well, there's a very large population of patients globally with asthma and COPD. And there, as you noted, there's quite a few biologics that are approved for both of those respiratory diseases, many more for asthma, but there's quite a few coming along for COPD. But those products are all focused on trying to reduce the incidence of exacerbation. So think of asthma and COPD of people trying to be stabilized at home, but every now and then having an asthma attack, what we would call an exacerbation. That where a situation where they have difficulty breathing, they try using their inhaler, it doesn't work, and they end up in the emergency room. So in the United States, there's over 1 million ER visits for asthma every year and over 1.3 million visits for COPD exacerbations every year. So we're not doing the greatest job yet of preventing exacerbations. But what has really been completely ignored is the actual exacerbation itself. When that patient shows up in the ER, they're being treated basically the same way they would have been 20 years ago. There's been very little innovation in terms of treating that acute exacerbation, and that's our focus. We believe our product, rademikibart, has a very exciting opportunity to profoundly benefit these patients.
While these are both respiratory diseases characterized by difficulty in breathing, the mechanisms of the diseases are different. One thing, though, that they do share in common is inflammation. What role does inflammation play in these conditions?
Yeah, absolutely, a significant role. Although not 100% of the population of asthma and COPD patients have this underlying inflammatory process, but a very large percentage do. And so this is what we would call T2 mediated respiratory diseases, those that are associated with overactivity of the immune system and significant inflammation associated with interleukin IL-4, IL-13. Our product is an IL-4 monoclonal antibody targeting the receptor that would block both of these IL-4 and IL-13 bad actors in this particular case. And so by reducing this acute inflammation during an episode, we believe that we can have a very significant effect on the airway, helping that patient start to breathe again on a more normal basis. And then long term, these drugs are used to kind of downregulate that inflammatory process so they have fewer exacerbations during the year.
What happens at a biological level when someone suffers an acute episode of one of these diseases? And does it leave them vulnerable for additional episodes for a period?
Yeah, that's a great observation. So what we found is that patients having an acute episode of either asthma or COPD, once that episode is initially controlled, for the next 4 to 6 weeks, that patient is very vulnerable to having a second episode. So their immune system and the inflammatory process has been revved up, and that patient tends to be quite vulnerable to a second episode. In a recent study, it was shown that almost half the patients within 4 weeks will either come back to the ER because they're getting worse, or they're going to have a second episode and need treatment.
That's so interesting to hear. Is it understood why that is?
Well, again, I think that the expectation is that whatever is the underlying cause of the initial kind of index episode is still there. And what we've done is the patient comes into the ER, they get a short course of prednisone, they get more bronchodilators, so that helps open the airways acutely. That gets the patient stabilized, send them home. They're on a short course of prednisone. Once they're done with that prednisone, the underlying inflammatory issue, unfortunately, for many patients, is still there or comes back, and they end up, returning to their clinician or going back to the ER.
You had mentioned your lead experimental therapy, rademikibart. What is it, and how does it work?
It's a monoclonal antibody targeting IL-4 receptor alpha. So it blocks what is a very important component of this inflammatory cascade. And by doing so, it prevents these interleukins, IL-4, IL-13, from producing this acute inflammatory result. And so what you see is you see less inflammation, and that is obviously what results in hopefully the patient having an improved airway. We've demonstrated in a large phase 2 study that rademikibart produced a really quite profound improvement in airway function, and a reduction of exacerbations over 24 weeks. So we know this, and this mechanism is also the same target of a very well established product that's on the market. So we know the mechanism is exactly right. In our case, we're very excited that our product works very quickly. We see an onset of effect in less than 24 hours. And that gives us the opportunity of having an impact on the acute episode.
The product I believe you alluded to was Dupixent, which is a $14 billion a year antibody that targets IL-4RA. It's approved for both asthma and COPD. Is that the advantage you're hoping to have, that you can address these acute episodes with this? Is that something that Dupixent doesn't do?
Correct. So we'd like to consider rademikibart a second generation Dupixent. Dupixent's a great product, as you noted. Does over 14 billion in annual sales. And in our particular case, we've demonstrated tighter binding, better binding dynamics to the target. We have somewhat of a longer half life. We have a different safety profile, but what we are using right now as the main differentiator is this very rapid onset of effect. Dupixent hasn't been studied in this particular setting, and in fact, their package insert, and of note, the package insert of all the biologics approved for asthma and COPD explicitly say do not use to treat an acute exacerbation. So our approach is we're going to go after exactly that exclusion in their package inserts and be the one and only biologic that's approved for, in fact, treating this acute exacerbation.
So is the expectation you'd be able to pursue a subset of patients, or do you think that ultimately you would be able to capture any part of this market?
Well, as I noted, not all patients have an underlying, very clearly defined inflammatory basis for their asthma or COPD, but it's a very easy blood test and one that most patients get when they go into the ER, and so it's very easy to take a look and see if your eosinophils are increased or not. That helps the clinician decide, hey, this is a patient that can really benefit from this type of therapy, or it's probably not going to help. And clearly, you want to use the drug only in patients where it's likely to benefit. That's a sizable portion of the asthma market is patients that have this underlying inflammatory process. And they're the ones that are most likely to show up in the ER. So we think that we have the opportunity of addressing a large proportion of the patients who actually come into the ER for acute therapy.
And what's known about it from the studies you've done to date?
Well, as I mentioned, the study that was previously done looked at patients with chronic asthma. The drug was started when they were stable, and then we followed those patients for 24 weeks, looking to see if how much we improved their airway and if we reduced the incidence of exacerbations. And we saw a really profound improvement in their airway and a very clinically important reduction of exacerbations.
How about in terms of safety?
Safety was really not different than placebo in that study. And so far, and this drug has been in a large number of trials around the world. We have a partner in China that's licensed the drug from us. They're well on their way to filing the drug for approval for atopic dermatitis, and then a few years down the road for asthma. So there's been hundreds and hundreds of people exposed, and the drug has been very well tolerated to date.
And what's the development path forward?
Well, so we met with the FDA earlier this year, got alignment on conducting two studies, which were just initiated. Both studies are in patients having acute episodes. One, we're looking at asthma patients having an acute exacerbation, the other, COPD patients having acute exacerbation. And we'll be following these patients for a 1 month time period to number one, look at how we're benefiting them acutely in terms of their airway. Are we reducing the number of people that get hospitalized? If they do get hospitalized, are we getting them out of the hospital sooner? And then, most importantly, the primary endpoint is how many patients have what we call a treatment failure, which is they get worse or they have a second exacerbation.
There are a number of other indications, including atopic dermatitis, which you are pursuing, that can potentially be addressed by targeting IL-4RA. How broadly are you thinking about other indications for the drug?
Well, right now, our primary focus is in respiratory, and it's in this acute exacerbation niche for both asthma and COPD. That really takes advantage of this very rapid onset of effect and helps us really differentiate the product from the number of other biologics already on the market. But we do have strong data in atopic dermatitis. So down the road, when we ultimately partner this drug with a larger pharma who's going to be the commercial entity, they may very well decide that, of course, we'd like to add on a second, third indication and go for atopic dermatitis. Similarly to our partners in China, where atopic dermatitis will likely be the first approved indication, asthma coming not too far after that.
You joined Connect in 2024. It was part of a series of changes at the company. What attracted you to Connect, and what did you see as the opportunity?
Well, I have been in pharmaceutical R&D for almost 40 years and have been fortunate enough to take 9 drugs through the development registration process, get them approved in the US. So I have a fairly good sense of what it takes to get a drug approved and which drugs are likely going to make it. In my extensive diligence on this company, going through the data with rademikibart, I felt very confident that this appeared to me to be an approvable drug, uh, excellent efficacy, clear safety profile. It just needed to find the right path forward to where it would be a commercially interesting product that would ultimately, bring in a partner or acquirer for the drug. So, as I saw it, this was a highly undervalued asset. The company was at the time and still is market cap less than the amount of cash we have on hand. So, the investment community right now, which biotech is definitely in a difficult period, is not valuing this asset, and so this was an opportunity to get in to the company at a time when it's very much undervalued. Take the cash that we have, use it to do appropriately designed studies that hopefully will significantly enhance the value, and then ultimately, as I said, partner or find an acquirer for this product because the asthma, COPD, these are very large markets, as I mentioned, millions of patients going into the ER. So this is, not likely a market that we would be launching this drug ourselves. There's too much of an opportunity to partner this.
Part of the other changes at the company was a shift to being a US centric company. What was the thinking of repositioning the company away from its presence in China, and what drove those changes?
Yeah, so this was a decision that the board made early last year before some of the macro issues that are going on now. So it turned out to be very timely and kind of ahead of their time in a sense. But they decided that the biotech financial markets in China were in pretty poor condition. It was very difficult to raise money in China for biotechnology companies. Clearly, as we all know, biotech companies, ultimately, even if they are well financed at one point in time, they down the road there's a likely need for more funds, and so the board felt that it was important to start building a stronger relationship with U.S. healthcare funds. And to do that, we wanted to, relocate the headquarters to the United States. It's now in San Diego, where the company had initially a small outpost. And so we've kind of gone from a Chinese-based biotech with a small outpost in San Diego to now a San Diego-based biotech with a small outpost in China. But probably the most important thing that we've done as part of moving to be more US centric was start putting out regulatory filings that are what investors are used to. And so, as a foreign filer, the company would put out the required information, which is a much reduced volume of information than investors normally get. And it was only twice a year. We've just recently put out our very first 10K and our 10Q. So from now on, investors every quarter will be getting the standard information they would expect to see from any US based biotech. And that's going to help a lot in terms of getting investors comfortable that they have the right kind of information, they know what's going on, and that they can depend on getting that information quarterly as needed.
And how far will existing cash take you?
So we have a runway into 2027. The studies that we just, and that includes finance, paying for these studies. Uh, the goal is to get the data from these two trials in the first half of next year. And so we'd still have plenty of runway from when we get the data and be able to, as I mentioned, look for partnering or an acquisition, as well as certainly the value creation at the time should assist in topping off the tank if we need to extend that runway somewhat.
Have you had discussions yet with any potential partners?
Yeah, actually, it's been very encouraging since joining the company. As we've started putting out new information on rademikibart, we at the ATS meeting this last week, we had four presentations, a lot of interest from companies who were visiting the posters, and we've had previous discussions with companies. So as now people see, the new approach and appreciate the opportunity of getting into a very large market with very little direct competition, the companies have definitely started to contact us.
Well, we do have another patent cliff that the industry is dealing with here. I'm curious if you're finding potential partners more receptive than potential investors.
Well, I think that's an accurate assessment. Right now, the investment community, I think, is sitting on the sidelines trying to figure out what's going on to happen next, where companies have to keep going. And as you noted, if they have a significant patent cliff coming, they have to start planning years ahead to make sure that they've got enough new products to fill the gap. And in this particular case, you've got a drug that has completed phase two in asthma for the chronic opportunity. We'll have phase two data early next year for the acute opportunity. We have manufacturing already set up in the U.S. And so this is a relatively straightforward, I won't say fast because nothing in drug development is fast, but definitely, as things go, a relatively quick development program to, an ultimate BLA and approval down the road with intellectual property protection, into 2040 and beyond. So nice opportunity to benefit from long exclusivity.
Barry Quart, CEO of Connect Biopharma. Barry, thanks so much for your time today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send an email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.